on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It's 8:37 on O'Connor and Company, and it's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Chris Plant is coming up, you know. It's always fun to have Christopher Plant on the radio, and he'll be joining us in just 30 minutes. Right now, though, we are joined by the legal affairs reporter at the Washington Times and host of the Court Watch podcast. And I saw that Chief Justice Roberts made a statement yesterday, a very rare statement. He doesn't speak much to the press. So I was very excited, Alex, that he was finally going to tell us an update on who leaked the Dobbs decision, something that I would think he would be pretty interested in. But no, This was a statement having to do with a Truth Social post where Trump was not happy with the conduct of a couple of judges and suggested one of them should be impeached. So tell us what Chief Justice Roberts said about. First of all, before we get into that, Alex, just, because you know the law better than I do, does the Chief Justice have any role whatsoever with regard to the impeachment of a federal judge?
No, and I'm surprised he made this statement. It reminded me, basically, there was during the first Trump administration, I don't know if you recall, but he also issued a statement when Trump was referring to different judges by who appointed them. I think he would say like an Obama judge, that sort of thing. I think it was in relation to the travel ban disputes that were litigated early on during Trump, 1.1, 1.0, I should say. And he said, there are no, Obama judges. And it was just kind of what eyebrow raising, since I've covered the court during, the past, 7 years. And I don't remember the Chief Justice coming out and issuing statements like these under President Biden. But now we have two, I would say, major examples during both Trump presidencies. And we're just a couple months into this one.
Alex, I have a follow-up question to that. Maybe the Supreme Court justice doesn't have a role in impeaching a judge, but can't the Supreme Court justice discipline, censure, somehow reprimand a lower court judge?
So those complaints would actually have to be filed. It's usually an appeals court. There's a conference that would handle that. And I'm sure that's something, if there hasn't already been some complaints filed, that you might see. I've seen some rumblings out there, either on social media or some reports about this judge's daughter apparently works, I guess, for an immigration advocacy group. There's been some that have claimed, that that's a potential conflict of interest. So if there hasn't already been complaints filed, I believe there will be. I would be surprised if there hasn't. But in terms of, to me as a lawyer and as a legal affairs reporter, I think this whole concept is just so interesting. One of the things that I found in researching this law at issue is that the Supreme Court actually took it up. I think it was like in 1948, after World War II. The Truman administration invoked this law basically to continue deportations. I think it was like 6 years after the war actually ended. And the Supreme Court had said, that this is a political issue that they weren't going to weigh or second guess the president. So there is precedent out there, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised at this point with how these kind of political cases end up working their way through the courts. But I was somewhat surprised the judge didn't, cite that as precedent and stay out of the matter.
Right.
A conflict of interest or in some way evidence of corruption, or a judge may make a decision that benefits himself or his family member. That's obvious cut and dry stuff for impeachment proceedings. Is there precedent for a judge or series of judges who consistently overstep their judicial authority, who violate separation of power? For instance, Stephen Miller famously the other day raised the question of a judge trying to prohibit the president from troop movements overseas. That would be a clear violation of the Constitution and the separation of powers. You could argue this is as well. It's not dealing with American citizens. These are a national security decision with an agreement made with a foreign country having to do with foreign nationals in the country illegally who have been designated a terror group. So if a judge oversteps his bounds and attempts to penalize the executive branch, is that grounds for impeachment?
Oh, of course, they can make the argument that it's an abuse of power, abuse of separation, the separation of powers, like you just said. However, I think going back to Julie's question, you mentioned when you started the segment about what Chief Justice Roberts said. I think the highest court in the land really needs to speak out on this issue, and that's it goes not only to this overreach, this activism, but also this idea too of these like nationwide injunctions we're seeing. Why would one district court be able to stop a whole the president's agenda across the nation? That's been an issue that I think all presidents have been dealing with, and especially it started during Trump's first administration. It's continued, and it's something we've heard from. I think it's like Justice Thomas has talked about it, as well as Justice Gorsuch in various concurrences and dissents. And they really need to do something about it. They need to be able to rein in these lower court judges. And I would have liked to see maybe a statement related to that from the Chief Justice. Or even, taking up a case where they're able to do that to, really be the one to lead the way on this, because it's just going to keep happening if there isn't more guidance to these lower courts.
Real quickly, we also had a decision yesterday from Anna Reyes. She is a Biden appointee and was celebrated as the first openly LGBTQ judge in the District of Columbia, which, of course, everyone knows the D.C. Circuit is oftentimes a gateway to the Supreme Court. Well, she just struck down the Trump administration's prohibition of transgender members of the military. This is not like it's been around for a long time. In her decision, by the way, she cited a lyric from the musical Hamilton, not case law, but a Broadway musical lyric. Right. Again, this sure seems like a conflict of interest here, Alex.
Yeah, so there's been actually, it's funny that you bring that up. I haven't read the decision yet, so if you have, it might be one I might ask you. I have a little law school friends group that we still chat, and once someone sent this over and raised the same issue you just did about the LGBT issue, is there a conflict? I was curious if that decision relied on the Bostock ruling, which we just keep seeing, I guess stretched. Bostock, for your audience, is the one that Gorsuch and Roberts sided with the Democrat appointees on the court and said, that there's sex in the civil rights era can be sex stereotypes, which then encompasses LGBT. So, this is something Alito had kind of warned about in his dissent, that it could be used for girls, sports. And, we're talking about transgenders in the military. And I was just kind of curious about, I hadn't looked at that yet, so I shouldn't really weigh in on it. But I was wondering
Bostock was cited. Yeah, Bostock was cited, as was Lin-Manuel Miranda. In the description of, not Miranda Rights, I mean Lin-Manuel, the composer on Broadway of the Hamilton musical. So Miranda Rights would have been better. But yeah.
You're raising an issue of the appearance of impartiality, potential bias, and I think it's fair. Everybody would question, if you're part of the LGBTQ movement, how could you fairly weigh this issue? Should you recuse? Similarly to when you were talking about the prior judge with his daughter's work and immigration activism, it definitely gives this appearance of an agenda rather than trying to follow the law.
It sure does. And sadly, that's what we're faced with right now, as judges feel like they need to take up the role of resistance against the Trump administration. Alex Swoyer, legal affairs reporter, Washington Times, and host of the podcast Court Watch. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It's 8:45. You bet.